Hi there and welcome to this 24th video of 2021, and this might be the most important video, the most important presentation that I have given this year, and I appreciate you for watching and also commenting because I think it's something that we need to discuss about what's going on in 2021, the conflict we see in society, and also what is the resolution and what direction is our country and our world going to go in from here on out. Okay, I call this Aquinas versus Marx, the definitive battle of our time, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that as we go along. The ultimate battle, we know, is between God, the force of good, and Satan, the force of evil. But that battle has already been won, and God is not going to lose that battle, but he's allowed us to fight it out, so to speak, here on earth, and he's allowed us to have free will and to choose between him and Satan. And what we're seeing in our culture right now is a lot of conflict, and we see Marxism, quite honestly, being promoted, and this is a philosophy that has its basis in atheism. The founder of Marxism was an atheist. Okay, we have politicians who are openly describing themselves as socialist, and we have very influential groups that are saying we're trained Marxists, and we're seeing civil unrest and rebellion and riots, and so it's something that we have to pay attention to and say, what is going on? Okay, so what's the solution? All right, I want to pose the theory that maybe what we see right now is a conflict between the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas and the philosophy of Karl Marx. You may know, if you've been watching these videos, that in a papal encyclical written back in 1879 by Pope Leo XIII called Aeterni Patris had a huge influence on me because it talked about a restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And this was almost 150 years ago, a long time ago. But what I found interesting about this encyclical is that as Leo XIII looked at the landscape of higher education and media at his time and what was going on in politics, he saw that there was a problem. And he's trying to isolate what was the root of the problem. And he said, if anyone looks carefully at the bitterness of our times, and he consider earnestly the cause of these things, the cause he will find to consist in this: evil teaching about human and divine has come forth from the school of philosophers. Okay, so when I read that, I thought, who is he talking about? Who are the philosophers that were on the radar of Pope Leo XIII? And so I'm going to roll through these real quickly. I've done a whole video on this before, so I don't want to belabor the point. René Descartes, okay, William of Ockham, Friedrich Nietzsche, of course, died in 1900, so he definitely would have been on the radar of Leo XIII. Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential German philosophers of all time. And we have Auguste Comte with positivism, very anti-Christian philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach, who influenced Karl Marx very, very much. He was a contemporary of Marx. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau of the Enlightenment. And we also have, the biggest influence on Karl Marx was, without a doubt, Wilhelm Georg Hegel. Okay, he was huge in developing Marxist philosophy, which is interesting because most people say Hegel would not have agreed with where Marx took his philosophy, right? Jean-Paul Sartre came later. He was mostly a 20th century philosopher, but atheist, a nihilist, and I think was influenced by a lot of these others, okay? And then there's Karl Marx, right? Died in 1883. The encyclical was written in 1879. He's the one that we want to focus on in this video and try to get a look and kind of examine what exactly did he stand for? What was his philosophy? And how might a better understanding of Thomism, of scholastic philosophy, Christian philosophy, battle some of the evil elements that are going on in our culture today? Let's first of all look at the two men. Aquinas lived in the 13th century. He was Italian. He was a Dominican Catholic priest. He grew up in a well-to-do family. His most famous works are the Summa Theologia and the Summa Contra Gentiles. His biggest influences were sacred scripture, St. Augustine, Aristotle. Marx lived about 600 years later. He was German. He was married, had 7 kids, only 3 of whom he raised because the other ones died early. Jenny was his wife. He was ethnically Jewish, but he was baptized and married in a Protestant church. He was an atheist, and this plays a big part of his philosophy and the influence that he continues to have in the world. His best-known works are the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. And as I already mentioned, his biggest influences were Hegel and Feuerbach. All right? What were some of the hallmarks of Karl Marx's philosophy? And as I go over these, kind of think about the key words that you see here and whether they sound like the words of peace and harmony and goodness and truth and beauty, or just the opposite, right? Class struggle. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle, he said in the Communist Manifesto, written in 1848. Dictatorship of the proletariat, the goal of the working class gaining control of political power. Communism, for him, the goal was conquest of political power by the workers, the abolition of private property, and the eventual establishment of a classless and stateless communist society. Internationalism, workers of the world unite. That is how he ended the manifesto. He wants to create a political structure that transcends national borders. Okay, no more countries. It's communism. Okay, all across the world. And of course, he said that religion is the opium of the people. And this came from his commentary on Hegel's philosophy of right. All right, so now let's compare what Aquinas had to say and notice the difference in the tone and what he's focused on. Aquinas says God is supremely knowable, and that therefore he set out in the second question of the Summa to prove the existence of God 5 different ways. The human person has a supernatural end and needs God's grace to achieve his final end. Grace builds upon nature. All men desire goodness. They seek truth. God is goodness. God is truth, and all men seek God. Man has come to know, can come to know about God through his experience of the created world. And God directs all creatures to their final end, but does allow the rational creature to choose him through the exercise of his free will. Notice the difference. This is a supernatural end. This is something that has to do with God directing people to their end, not man imposing his will and conflict and subjugation and control. Okay, that's the big difference. A few quotes from each man. Communism, Karl Marx said, is the genuine resolution of the antagonism between man and nature and between man and man. It is the true resolution of the conflict between existence and essence, objectification and self-affirmation, freedom and necessity, individual and species. It is the riddle of history solved and knows itself as the solution. Again, the key word there, conflict, battle, okay? That's what Marx was all about. He goes on, the whole proletariat must be armed at once with muskets, rifles, cannons, and ammunition, and the revival of the old-style citizens' militia directed against the workers must be opposed. The consciousness of the past weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. Surround yourself, this one's interesting, okay? I actually kind of like this one. Surround yourself with people who make you happy, people who make you laugh, who help you when you're in need, people who are genuinely care. They are the ones worth keeping in your life. Everyone else is just passing through, okay? Doesn't seem like it fits, but I thought I'd throw that in there nonetheless. All right, a couple of quotes from Aquinas from the Summa. Of course, he wrote a lot, but these are a couple that I think mean a lot to me, okay? Notice the difference. Okay, the distinction and multitude of things comes from the intention of the first agent, who is God. For he brought things into being in order that his goodness might be communicated to creatures and be represented by them. And because his goodness could not be adequately represented by one creature alone, he produced many and diverse creatures, that what was wanting to one in the representation of the divine goodness might be supplied by another. For goodness, which in God is simple and uniform, in creatures is manifold and divided, and hence the whole universe together participates the divine goodness more perfectly and represents it better than any single creature would ever. There's no mention of conflict or antagonism or isolation or fighting or hostile takeover of society. What he's talking about is that we observe nature. We observe beauty like butterflies and flowers and dolphins and human babies in the womb, and we look at these, okay, and it makes us wonder about where they came from. Look at the second quote here. The ultimate beatitude of man consists in the use of his highest function with the operation of his intellect. If we suppose that the created intellect could never see God, it would either never attain to beatitude or its beatitude would consist in something else besides God, which is opposed to faith. For there resides in every man a natural desire to know the cause of any effect which he sees, and thence arises wonder in men. But if the intellect of the rational creature could not reach as far as the first cause of things, the natural desire would remain void. What's he getting at here? He's talking about beauty and goodness and truth, and all the good things that we experience in life lead us to a curiosity and wanting to know about God. Does that sound appealing, or does class struggle and conflict and isolation and battles and this is the choice we have to make in 2021? Okay, so what will Marxism look like? Okay, you can kind of tell I'm a little prejudiced here, but Marxism is going to have to come about through conflict. We're already seeing that in 2020 and 2021, a lot of it. The people rising up against the police, right? It's going to be all private property is abolished, okay? That's one of the keys of Marxism, right? Education will be changed. It's going to be under the supreme control of the state, according to Karl Marx. All right, the statues being torn down now are the ones that represent our heritage in this country. The ones that will come up will be of Karl Marx. The leaders will be different. I did a search for the leader of China among the people, and I couldn't find a single one. He doesn't go out among the people, all right? He's a dictator, all right? And in the places where Marxism, socialism, communism has been tested, it ends up in freedom being abolished and a small group of people benefiting and the rest of the people suffering greatly. What does a Christian state look like? Well, it's basically what we've had in America for the last, couple hundred years. It's focused on the family, focused on mom and dad and the kids. It's freedom of religion and being able to worship where we want and worship who we want, and leaders being among the people, okay? It has to do with ownership of property and houses, and yes, even the opportunity to be wealthy, okay? If you want to be wealthy, you can be wealthy. And it has to do with freedom of the open road and doing what we want and being able, within certain limits, of having the freedom of opportunity. And for most Americans, that's a good thing. Yes, there's always going to be conflict. There's no perfect society. But is this something that we want to treasure and hold on to, okay? Finally, what's the ultimate goal of these two philosophies? Marxism, without a doubt, is a worldly goal. We're going to set up a perfect earthly society. Thomism, on the other hand, Christian philosophy, says, no, we enjoy the world now. There's a lot of good here, but our ultimate satisfaction, our ultimate end is found in union with God and beatitude, okay? It's something beyond this. It's supernatural. All right, so that's what we face in 2021. Do we want Christian philosophy according and best explained by St. Thomas Aquinas, or do we want socialism, Marxism, communism as explained and taught by Karl Marx? All right? Flannery O'Connor was once asked about the Eucharist being a symbol, and she said, if it's a symbol, to hell with it. And I think a lot of people say, if this is all we have, if the struggles and pains and even the best of this world is all there is, to hell with it, many of us would say, because we know this isn't all there is. All right, one more quote from Aeterni Patris by Leo XIII. He said, a last triumph was reserved for this incomparable man, talking about St. Thomas Aquinas, namely to compel the homage, praise, and admiration of even the very enemies of the Catholic name. For it has come to light that there were not lacking among the leaders of heretical sects some who openly declared that if the teachings of Thomas Aquinas were only taken away, they could easily battle with all Catholic teachers, gain the victory, and abolish the church. Okay, a vain hope indeed, but no vain testimony. What's he saying here? Some people said if we could just do away with the influence of Thomas Aquinas, we can destroy the church. We can set up a secular rule. Leo says that's a vain hope, but it's no vain testimony. What does this all mean? It means that we need to take Thomistic philosophy seriously. All right, I want to end with this final quote. The ultimate beatitude of man consists in the highest use of his function, which is the operation of his intellect. For there resides in every man a natural desire to know the cause of any effect for which he sees, and thence arises his wonder in men. But if the intellect of the rational creature could not reach so far as the first cause of things, the natural desire would remain void. So as we look at this duel between Aquinas and Marx, we ask ourselves, when we see beauty, when we see goodness, when we see things that amaze us, and when we see created nature, and there arises in us a wonder, do we say to ourselves, you know what, I think the here and now is all we have? Or do we look at the world and say, you know what, this is beautiful, this is good, this is true, but I know that there is something else. And this is what we need to ask ourselves in 2021. Which direction are we going to go? And I think, as you can probably tell, the way to go is the way of Christianity, the way of Jesus Christ and the saints. And it's all the more reason we need to take seriously a study of the Summa Theologia and the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas now more than ever. God bless you.